This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and today is Friday, and that means it's time for this 510th MTG Top 10. In this series, I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Today, we'll be taking a look at cards with a mana value of 11 or higher. In past MTG Top 10s, I have taken a look at cards with really high mana values like 8, 9, and 10, but I thought it was time to go even higher and take a look at the best cards in the game with insanely high mana values of 11 or higher. That's obviously a lot of mana. So what you tend to get for that investment is really powerful. And as we'll see, a lot of the cards on this list either have ways to reduce their costs, or they're cheated into play in one way or another. Obviously, to be eligible for this list, a card had to have a mana value of 11 or higher. There are 29 cards that meet that requirement, and in this video we'll take a look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours and World Championships. And a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like Grand Prix and Regional Championships. Alright, let's get to the list. At number 10, it is Draco, which has a mana value of a massive 16 mana, which is the highest mana value in the entire game. It can lower its mana value for each basic land type among lands you control, which means if you get Domain going to the fullest extent, it's a 6 mana 9/9 flyer. That's impressive to be sure, but without any sort of protection, casting this can be pretty risky. However, Draco has seen play exactly because of its incredibly high mana value. In Extended, it was combined with Erratic Explosion to do 16 damage to the opponent, which was often enough to kill them in one shot since it was a format with pain lands. It hasn't gained any points since 2008, but its status as the most expensive card in the game does mean that it has an outside shot at future success, provided some more cards get printed that look at mana values. At number 9, it's Galta Primal Hunger. This 12/12 Trampler has a mana value of 12, but Galta's cost can easily be lowered since it costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of your creatures. While in Standard, Galta saw play in mono-green aggro decks. Like most stompy decks, these decks ran lots of creatures with high power for the cost, like Steel Leaf Champion, which could come down on turn 2. So Galta was often quite easy to cast for that deck. Galta hasn't seen play anywhere since rotating out of Standard, and some other expensive cards might have a shot at bumping it off the list in the future. If you're interested in hearing more about mono-green aggro or stompy decks, I did do a deck history on the topic, so check that out. At number 8, it is Darksteel Colossus, an 11 mana 11/11 with Trample and Indestructible. When this card came out, it seemed completely absurd. We hadn't really seen anything like it before. Indestructible made its debut in Mirrodin block, and at the time, there wasn't nearly as much removal that could deal with an indestructible creature, so Darksteel Colossus was kind of unbeatable. Still, the trick was finding a way to actually get it in play, but people found a variety of ways to do that. In Block Constructed, it was ramped into in a Cloud Post deck. In Legacy, it was played alongside Gamekeeper so that it could be cheated into play off of its death trigger. And in Vintage, it's been cheated into play using Goblin Welder. While the Colossus does shuffle itself back into the library if it goes to the graveyard, you can respond to that trigger with the Welder's ability and put the massive indestructible monster into play as early as turn 2. As I alluded to when I first started talking about the Colossus, over the years it has become significantly less impressive, as indestructibility means less these days, and it hasn't gained any points since 2008 as there are just better creatures to cheat into play, some of which we'll see higher up on this list. At number 7, it is a Tocthan Worm. This monster has a massive 15 mana value, but it does come with Convoke, so you can make it cost a lot less. However, the worm is basically never actually cast by anyone and really not even put into play. Instead, the fact it has a high mana value is what has led to it being played in decks. All of its points have come in Modern, either in conjunction with Nourishing Shoal or Calibrated Blast. When it's doing its thing with Nourishing Shoal, it's usually alongside a deck that has Gristlebrand in it, and you can see how gaining 15 life with the Shoal is absolutely absurd, because it means you get to draw more cards, which might find you more Shoals and more Worms, which then lets you draw even more cards. And in Calibrated Blast decks, the goal is to reveal the Worm off the top so you can do 15 damage to the opponent, which is often enough to end the game. It looks like the Worm's huge mana value is going to continue to lead to it seeing play in Modern, so it might be able to move up this list. At number 6, it is Ulmog, the Infinite Gyre. You had to know the Eldrazi would have some presence on this list, as the most powerful ones are well known for having massive casting costs. If you cast Ulmog, it destroys a permanent, in addition to giving you an indestructible 10/10 with Annihilator 4. This card does actually get cast sometimes too. In Standard, it was played in an Eldrazi ramp deck, and in Modern, it was played in Cloudpost decks while they were still legal there, and in Tron decks ever since Cloudpost got banned. It is one of the more powerful creatures in all of Magic, and that makes it likely it will see some more play in the future. This is the kind of card that really shows you how Darksteel Colossus has fallen off over the years, because this is a lot better than it, and it costs the same amount of mana. At number 5, it is Enter the Infinite, the only non-permanent card on this list. For the price of 12 mana, this sorcery draws you every single card in your library, and then you put one of those cards on top of your library. It is usually the case that drawing your whole deck wins you the game in most games of Magic, and obviously Enter the Infinite can get you there. Casting it is no small task, though. In Legacy, you can get around this problem by getting Omniscience into play, and Omniscience is itself super expensive, but you can put it into play with Show and Tell, and once you do that, you can cast Enter the Infinite for free, draw your whole library, and also play all of those cards for free thanks to Omniscience. Unsurprisingly, casting every card in your library in a single turn wins you the game. In addition to that success in Legacy, Enter the Infinite has also seen play in Pioneer, in a deck that could actually cast it. Between 2019 and 2020, it was a big part of Lotus Field decks, which specialized in untapping the field multiple times per turn to generate insane mana. So much that casting Enter the Infinite was possible. At that point, you would cast Thassa's Oracle to win the game. Ultimately, the Oracle did get banned out of Pioneer, and Lotus Field decks have largely fallen by the wayside as a result, at least as far as the decks that run Enter the Infinite to help them win the game. It has also found some more limited success in Possibility Storm decks in Pioneer, which only run one sorcery in the deck, so if they can tutor it up and cast it, they get to cast Enter the Infinite for free. So far, Enter the Infinite doesn't have any points in 2022, but it is arguably the most powerful sorcery in the entire game, and it's a card that should be considered for any deck that can produce a ton of mana, or that can cast super expensive things for free, so I don't think we can really count it out. At number 4, it is Worldspine Worm. This 11 mana monster is a 15/15 with Trample, and when it dies, you put 3 5/5 Trampling Worm tokens on the table. This is another card that hasn't been traditionally cast a whole lot, as most decks look to cheat it into play. In Modern, it is played in Gristlebrand, another deck that uses Nourishing Shoal, where the Worm is good to exile with the Shoal for that 11 life, but the deck can also cheat it into play using Through the Breach. It's simply one of the sweetest things to put into play with Through the Breach, since it bashes for 15, and then gives you those Worm tokens, and you only paid 5 mana. The Worm has also seen play in Pioneer, where it was used in landless spy decks. These decks like to mill their entire library for value, and in that deck, the Worm helps provide some insurance against self-decking. More recently, it's been a creature to cheat into play in Indomitable Creativity decks. The Worm has also found some success in Legacy Sneak Attack decks. It's so sweet to cheat into play that the Worm is likely to continue to gain points in the future, especially in decks that can put it into play with haste and sacrifice it at the end of their turn. At number 3, it is Blightsteel Colossus. The Colossus is massively expensive, of course, but between Trample and Infect, it can usually win the game in one swing, and it also isn't easy to deal with because of indestructibility. So yeah, it definitely gives you what you need for the massive amount of mana you spend. As is true for most of the cards on this list, the decks that run the Colossus can either produce absurd amounts of mana or effectively cheat it into play. It's gained all of its points in the Eternal formats, In Legacy, you could get it into play with Galta Forgemaster, or by using Metalworker to produce tons of mana. In Vintage, there are no shortage of ways to cheat this into play, with Oath of Druids and Tinker being the most common ways to do it. The Colossus is played in a ton of Vintage decks, even Storm decks tend to run Tinker and the Colossus as a backup win condition, leading to its fairly massive score in the format. It's likely to continue to gain points going forward. At number 2, it is Emrakul the Promised End. She costs 13 mana, but she reduces her cost for each card type among cards in your graveyard, so casting her for 6 or 7 isn't too challenging. And when you do, she brings an absolutely massive body to the table that is virtually impossible to block thanks to both flying and trample, and she also can't really die to instants. While all of that is pretty impressive, it's Emrakul's cast trigger that makes her really powerful. She lets you steal an opposing player's turn. And yes, that player then gets to have another turn after that, but you can absolutely wreck a player by stealing one of their turns, even if they get one right after. You can fire off all their spells on their own creatures, make their creatures attack into yours, and so on, so by the time they get to have their turn, they will be pretty much entirely wrecked. Early on in her time in Standard, Emrakul was played in Emerge and Delirium decks, but she got really busted after the introduction of Kaladesh and Aetherworks Marvel. The Marvel made it so you could get Emrakul into play even earlier, and because Marvel technically lets you cast the card for no mana, you even get the turn-stealing effect. Ultimately, this led to the banning of Emrakul the Promised End in Standard. However, Emrakul has gained a ton of points in other formats, allowing it to stay very active over the years. In Pioneer, it's seen play in Devotion to Green and Delirium. In Modern, you can find it in any deck capable of producing a lot of mana, like Amulet Titan, Tron, and Omnath. In Legacy, it's played in Cloud Post ramp decks as well as Eldrazi Tribal, and it has also gained a few points in Legacy land still. So Emrakul the Promised End is super active, and she may have a chance at catching the number 1 card on the list, which is Emrakul Eons Torn. That's right, another Emrakul. I did consider putting both of these together, but ultimately I decided they were different enough and played in enough different decks that they deserved their own slots. This 15-mana creature has a reasonable claim as the most powerful creature in all of Magic. She can't be countered, she's a 15/15, she lets you take an extra turn if you cast her. She also comes with flying, protection from colored spells, and Annihilator 6. If you can cast her, it's impossible for you to lose the game. But even if you don't get that Time Walk part of the card, just cheating her into play and attacking with her once often does the job. As if you do it early, they have to sacrifice all of their permanents because of Annihilator and take 15. So while Emrakul is occasionally cast by some decks, most of the time people just try to cheat it into play using various methods we've seen throughout this video, like Through the Breach, Oath of Druids, Sneak Attack, Indomitable Creativity, and Show and Tell. In Modern, there have also been 2 methods we haven't talked about so far. One of them is Goryo's Vengeance, which is an instant, so you can actually respond to Emrakul's graveyard trigger and put it into play for only 2 mana, and it gains haste. The other is Nahiri the Harbinger, who can use her ultimate to search up Emrakul. While both Emrakuls are going to keep on gaining points, it does seem like Eons Torn sees play in a wider variety of decks and a wider variety of formats, so it may be able to hold on to its edge. So, those are the 10 cards that cost 11 or more mana that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you want to own any of these super powerful cards, check out the description, where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card in this video. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you stay aware of future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.